Thank you, and welcome back to Elevation Mindset Summits. Today, we are talking about the movement from selfishness to generosity. We appreciate you showing up for these sessions with us, where we really like to get into the meaty parts of life and move beyond the here's 3 steps to make things perfect in your life. And we really like to have these deeper conversations. So today, we're starting off with this idea of generosity. And I'm curious for each of you, what does generosity mean to you? We kind of went back and forth on several different definitions as we were preparing for our session today. And curious if you wanted to either raise your hand or you can actually type this in the chat of what does that big word with, some very complex meanings mean to you? What is generosity? I like that. Having a cup that overflows. Yes.
Abundance. Yes. Love it. What else comes to your mind? It's funny, even when Michael and I started talking about this, you would assume that we came to it from the same place. But the more we talked about our definitions, they were not the same. And so it may surprise you. Sharing your overflow. Yes.
So we had another question that we want you to ponder as well as we continue here. And that is, what are the internal signals for you that you receive that let you know that you're being generous? Is it a feeling of discomfort? Is it a feeling of ease? Is it a feeling of grace?
How do you
How does that show up for you? How do you feel whenever you are being generous? And is there a signal that says that you're doing that? Exactly. So it is one of those things that does amplify and multiply. So go ahead, Aunt Suzanne.
Yeah, no, I think like Val, when you typed happy, there is some kind of magical bliss that happens. I think there's something really special. When you've been generous, it's like some kind of magic sprinkles. Who knows where they come from? But you're right. It's like a certain moment of happiness that's like, it's unique though. When it comes from generosity, that type of happiness, I think it's special. Feels open. Yes, it is open. It's about abundance because everybody's saying overflow, which, yes, you guys are using my language. I love it. Content. Oh, yes. When you feel content, there's a peace that comes, right? There's a bit of bliss, a bit of magic, and a bit of peace. I think you guys are tapped in today. Ah, yes. These are the feelings we're talking about. And it's so much more than like, oh, I did good. I feel good about myself, which, we do that too sometimes, right? But this is a little bit more magical. And I always say generosity is an inside job. The magic is all inside. Very cool.
So one of the things that we like to dig into each time we bring up one of these topics is kind of share for you as well as for us of, why is this topic important to us? It does have this openness feeling. It does, generate kind of this goodwill is actually something we're putting out, but we actually get something from it as well. But there's also, we're talking about when we are giving in this way, when we think, if we identify, yes, I'm being generous. Are you being generous when you actually, it's saying like I'm being authentic right now. Are you being authentic?
So it's one of these things. Michael and I hate that when people are like, I'm going to be really authentic with you. And it's like, what are you other times? Or when you call yourself authentic or generous, for me, it's like red flag, red flag, red flag.
But we also kind of get this when it's about what you get back, that tends to repel people. It's that intent that's underlying it. So when we're being generous, it's without that intent, you're going to get something back. It's doing this from, the term I hear in America is from the kindness of your heart, is where that generous place comes from. But when it is coming from this place of what are you going to get back, it tends to repel people. They can actually smell that, they can sense that, they can feel that. But when we're being generous, it builds energy. It actually multiplies energy when we're giving it out from that place of generosity.
Yeah, I can tell, guys, just from how you're already showing up today, that you know about energy. Because you were talking about these feelings that you get when you're generous. And it's that energy, that's your vibration. And we know that when we're generous, that vibration magnifies. And I think it's contagious. I think it's viral. I think it's contagious. And like Michael said, it multiplies. And of course, it gives us so much fuel to do it again, to tap into that again. That's some good stuff. I didn't even think of myself, but there's something there for me, even though my heart was on someone else. My heart was on building, giving. It wasn't about me. So I think the returns are exponential.
Absolutely.
And
there's also,
yeah, go ahead, Michael. I was going to say, you brought up my favorite point about what is really behind us talking about generosity, because guys, look at what you're doing. Look at the Lifebook community. It sounds simplistic. Yeah, be generous. But Michael, what did you say one of the reasons was?
well, it actually came out, I think, kind of at the end of our conversation as we were finally prepping for this, is that to me, one of the things that we are the most generous with is our time. It's that one thing that we don't get back. However, I feel we also have stopped being generous with people who think differently than we do, that act differently, that may look differently than us. We've stopped being generous in this space of maybe what I believe is wrong, because I think that can be an act of generosity as well. We've gotten so polarized in the world right now, where there seems to be so much focus on what is different, and different is wrong. And I think that that's where we have really reduced the amount of generosity that we have for all people, not just myself, my core, my tribe. And I think that that's something that, so in another life of mine, I work in the public broadcasting space, and there's a program out there on NPR called StoryCorps. And they started off having conversations between loved ones, and they would record those and they put them at the Library of Congress. And they've stepped up their game. It's not just between loved ones at this point. Here in the United States, they have also put together two people from different sides of the aisle, someone who's really liberal, one who's conservative, and sat them down and facilitated a conversation with them to really ensure that they're having a conversation, not about politics, but seeing the person that's on the other side, to build this idea of let's spend some time with someone to realize that they're not the Antichrist, they're not the devil, they're not that they are other in some ways, yes, but that does not make them being our enemy. That doesn't make them evil. And I think that is one of the biggest spaces where we have lost the generosity of
so agree.
Kindness.
For those of you who don't know, I have a background in conflict resolution, and I'm often paid to bring people together, people who have differences, people who are fighting. Sometimes, it's tribes that are fighting. Sometimes it's cultures that are fighting. But, somewhere along the way, we allowed ourselves to stop being generous with our time. We cut people off. We have cancel culture. It's a thing. Guys, are we being generous? And if you look around at the influences in your life, at your friends, at the people that you're surrounding yourself with, if they all look like, think like, act like you, you're doing something wrong. This is a big, beautiful world, and we need to be generous with each other. You know, the word that kept coming to mind and to heart when we were having this conversation is grace. Do you have grace for each other? And do you have grace for yourself? Are you generous to yourself? So, and the other societal issue we thought about that was really big was happening is, you know, along with that intolerance that we're seeing, is you're no longer innocent until proven guilty. Now we're saying, prove it to me. Prove to me you're innocent. Prove to me you're right, because I'm going to automatically assume you're not. And so in your description, guys, when you talked about how you feel when you're generous, the word came out open. But guess what? When we're not generous with people, that's right, you're closed. So believing that somebody's guilty until proven innocent, that's closed. And these are the things we need to fight back in life and really examine. Are we being generous? You know, there's a phrase, benefit of the doubt. Are you big enough? Are you secure enough? Are we okay enough to give someone the benefit of the doubt? It's a little risky. It requires a little faith, a little trust, but it's generosity. And so this is the kind of feeling we come at you with today, and we're so grateful you're with us. So, Michael, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I think that's worthwhile. We do look like we have a couple of new people here. So for those who haven't been with us, so my name is Michael Dankloffs. I consider myself a life vision outfitter in a company that I call Elevate Your Best. I focus on helping people discover and refine their life vision and then start taking the steps towards it. I've really taken that life book framework and applied it and want to share how I've applied it to other people. And in order for them to live the best version of their life. I've seen so many people struggle to actually, get to the end of whatever that piece is. And I want to support people to get there. And sometimes it's through kicking their ass to get there. And sometimes it's holding the space and listening from what is not being said. So I think that that's really, really important to hear someone. And that's one of those spaces where generosity is one of those things that I bring to that space is let's hear what you have to say and what you're not saying and help unpack that. What about you, Suzanne?
Yeah, so for those who don't know me, Suzanne Buchanan, I have a communications business, Carrot Communications, and I am a mediator, a facilitator, a conflict resolution professional. And I specialize in bringing people together and actually organizations too, to have conversations that matter. So Michael and I found each other over 2 years ago, right? And we saw that no one was really showing up to have powerful conversations on personal growth and development that go deeper than 3 steps to fix your life. And off you go. And so we tried to show up and not that we are perfect and experts, but we are intentionally becoming the best we can be. Michael, through his coaching and his personal development journey, which is a beautiful story, if you guys haven't heard it. And for me too, I am a lifelong student, so always here to learn. And for those of you who haven't been with us, we definitely open up for questions and answers and dialogue towards the end. So we welcome your engagement and thank you for being here.
One of the other questions that we asked on this subject of generosity is relative. It's in a particular space. If in one of the questions that Suzanne asked me is that when you feel like you have nothing left to give, how can you be generous? When you're stuck in that scarcity mindset, in that closed mindset, how do you kind of get there? What is that trigger that allows you to be generous? And some of those easy examples, those things of, yes, I may feel down, I may feel depressed, I may feel put upon, but I can still share a smile with someone who is walking along the street with me. I can still actually give a compliment to someone and notice someone. It's an ability to do this. And it was kind of like one of our things we really wanted to get to this point and talk about was, if you find yourself stuck in something, find a way, and even the smallest way, to serve something outside of you, if that serves someone else or serve a larger cause. It's one way that we can actually bring that generosity. And in doing so, it's this weird paradox of, you can't do it because you want to be generous, but as you're being generous, it does actually amplify and bring you back up. But sometimes it is that person who isn't normally seen is actually acknowledge them, is one of the easiest ways, because I can tell whenever I've been in a crowded room or even walking along the street that there's so much going on that you stop noticing the people who are around you. You stop noticing those beings that we're sharing this life with. And I think that can be one of the simplest ways to share that space of generosity. And oddly enough, when you get that smile back, it then creates this snowball loop in a direction that we want. And it's one way that I feel that we can kind of start this ball rolling. But we also want to kind of talk about some examples too. Yes, gratitude for sure also is key for that. And it's one of the reasons why so many people say have a gratitude journal or a gratitude practice, because it can help amplify that. And it seems relatively simple, and yet it does actually build the muscles to seek those things that we are grateful for. I think that's key in kind of this process as well, is maybe even sharing what you're grateful for about in someone else. And specifically, not, hey, you're cool, but actually really, once again, being specific. But I know for me that there's, like Suzanne asked, there's two different kind of ways that generosity can be experienced. One, receiving the gift from someone else that you never can repay. It's them being generous to you. So for me, there's been quite a few people who have accepted me for who I am, knowing where my past has been and on the journey that I'm on. And it's not something I'm proud of. It's not something that I would repeat if I had the choice to do it. At the same time, it's what's led me to here. It's been one of those stepping stones. And I at least know in the work that I've done in the men's circle is, for men, one of the biggest ways that they can receive being loved is to be accepted for who they are. But in this cancel culture that we talked about earlier, there's so little of that. It's actually more a matter of unaccepting, judgmental, and critical of everything that you do. So, and I know I've received that from a handful of people, probably 2 or 3 handfuls of people, that changed my relationship with them. It actually took it to a deeper level. And I've had the opposite of that too, of, nope, I'm done with you, move on. So, and that distance between those two experiences is actually what has helped me feel the generosity from someone when they have given that to me. But then there's also that giving of generosity as well. So I've had the opportunity just in the last few years to actually have a home for our son to come back to. He actually was in Florida and actually was so distressed that he needed a place to come back to. And to the point that I actually gave up my office so he could use that as a bedroom and then rebuilt one because we had the space and it felt like the right thing to do. And we could have said, no, you're stuck on your own, you handle it on your own. But we up and moved and drove from New Hampshire to Florida, got his stuff and came back. I mean, that's 42 hours of driving in essence is what it came down to. But there was never a question of whether we'd do it or not. And there wasn't the question of, hey, I'm doing this to be generous. It was, well, this is the thing to do. And then also having this as a safe space to come back to, because that's what it was about. And there's been a couple of times that has been the case here. And once again, it's not from this, hey, let me pat myself on the back. That's, I built a safe space here for people to come back to. My daughter will actually spend about 4 or 5, almost 6 years ago, decided to spend more time here at my home than at her mom's, because this was a safe space to be. It was actually more peaceful here. And she wasn't actually being attacked verbally here rather than at her mom's house. And that to me is another one of those things that I've been more intentional about, especially since I started my life book, is having this safe space for people to come back to. But it's also out of the actions that people have come to see it. And that to me is kind of the feedback loop of this is working is the word that comes to mind. But that's how I've kind of brought that in the scope of what I've done. So what about you, Suzanne?
Well, that was a long segue. So, guys, Michael's example was with family. And I can't help but to think it's always easier to be gracious and generous with somebody you already love. And I just wanted to challenge you guys. How often are you generous with someone where there is no ROI, where you may never see the return? Michael will have the edification of seeing his, children feel safe and watching them grow into secure, beautiful souls, right? That's a big ROI. And it's beautiful and it's powerful and it is generous. But are we also giving in ways? Are we also generous to those where we won't have a return? We won't see anything. And are you living in abundance? So much so that you can overflow, that you can give. So for me, when Michael and I started talking about this, he was coming to generosity from a very different place. And for me, it was synonymous with the word grace. Like a gift you just you'll never repay. It's almost like something that's bestowed upon you. And for the person who receives it, it's beautiful and warm, but oh my gosh, you're like, I could never repay you. How many times have you been generous that way? And for me, I always call myself a developing country. I say I have so many needs. I'm like a hot mess in so many ways. You name it, I got that. Like, rare, potentially fatal blood disease. I got that. Like family drama. I got that. The list is long. But the level of grace and generosity I've received will fuel me till my dying day. I could never repay people for the gifts that they have given me. I mean, let alone the life I have, right? We are all fortunate to be here. And when we talk about gratitude practices, gratitude as a muscle, I call gratitude like the elevated state. You can practice it or you can live in it and become it. Become grateful and gracious. So that it's not outside that you're tapping into, it's within. And so for me, I've had so many examples, guys, like when I moved to Pakistan as a single American female, everyone took care of me. The culture was beautiful. They said, wow, a single American female without family, without a husband. How can we help you? How can we serve you? Within 1 week, or 2 weeks, I had people offering furniture, a place to stay, clothing, local clothing they wear there, the shalwar kameez. I just got to the airport and I was so in culture shock because I hadn't been there before. I looked around, it looked like 1,000 mullahs. Everybody's like long beards. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm like in the middle of the Taliban country and I'm freaking out. And I go to grab my suitcase and somebody grabs it. They grab it out of my hand. And he said, mashallah, madam, that suitcase is bigger than you. Let me get that for you. Oh, I'm going to be okay. What a message of diplomacy. Pakistan basically said, I've got you. And it was like that the whole time. It's funny when we hear about Taliban terrorism in Pakistan, they took care of me. And I had a rougher time in India than Pakistan, interestingly. But, other times, as I mentioned, I have a rare, potentially fatal blood disease. And there are times when I am so sick. I've had all the near-death experiences, all the woo-woo, you name it, I've been there. The old bright light tunnel, all of that stuff. But it's when I wake up and I'm recovering and my then boyfriend is holding my body up in the shower, blowing my hair dry, and just taking care of me. It is in our greatest moments of vulnerability that we receive the most powerful grace and generosity. And when you think about being that warrior in the world, as you guys are all living intentionally and growing into your personal development journeys, the impact you can have when you are generous, it's life-changing. I've said this before, I say it again, we are all powerful creators of our destiny, but we also have the power to create and inform someone else's destiny. That smile you gave somebody that you didn't even think twice about, that was generous and you changed their day. And because you changed their day, they made a great decision and they had a little bit more abundance in their world and they impacted others. And then you have the viral chain. Your thoughts have power. You guys know this. I know you know this. Your thoughts have power. Your thoughts have energy. Are you generous with your thoughts? Because that's powerful too. We always focus on the big actions. Like I said, all those big things that happened to me. But even the thoughts matter. You don't have to be the hero. you can change the world just by how you think, because that informs how we behave. It informs the words we speak. And all of those things vibrate universally. So you guys are powerful. Are you feeling it today? You know that you're powerful? You know, one of the things that Michael and I really wanted to convey is just that when you are living in generosity, and you guys already know this because I saw your comments in the beginning, you're living in a world of abundance, not scarcity. Abundance. So what, go ahead.
You mentioned a couple of different areas where you have kind of shown that generosity. There's one that I think that is also an important one. It's that allowing other people to unburden their negativity too. Can you speak to that in your work around that?
Yeah. So guys, like I said, I'm a mediator. I have a background in conflict resolution. And what that means is that I've worked in communities and cultures where there's deep trauma. Talk about racial tension, talk about discrimination, talk about people who come to this nation and don't feel welcome. And there was a few years ago, there was an event in Charlottesville, Virginia, where there were lots of extreme right-wing groups and extreme left-wing groups that came together, and things got very violent. And in the midst of the violence and turmoil, I was there working for the United States Department of Justice, and Heather Heyer, who was on the streets that day, was killed by a vehicle, pretty much intentionally. And what resulted from that was more violence, of course. But after that event, I was the one from the United States Department of Justice that was brought in to help the community heal. And they were angry. Everyone was angry. They were hurt. This fomented more racial division in an area that they couldn't afford anymore. There were already things beneath the surface. And so in order to really listen to what the real issues are and get not just through the hurt, but to the actual issues, the problems that can be solved, I designed a forum where the community could come and discuss their grievances. And this was right after the violence happened. And even if you Google my name in Charlottesville, Virginia, and Department of Justice, I'm probably there. So how many people showed up? Well, about 20 people from the media, CNN, Fox News, all the news, local news channels as well, and about 400 to 500 people. And I moderated the event, and I designed it so that they would never project their anger to the city leaders directly, so it didn't turn into an attack. I directed their anger to me. I moderated, I spoke with them as my colleagues took copious notes on what the issues were. And we built a list from that of problems that we could actually solve, and noted all the categories of pain. This happened. There were probably about 300 people that stepped forward to speak. Our events were usually scheduled for maybe 2 hours. This went on for 5 hours. I took their anger. I took their fear. I took their heartbreak, their disappointment. Some had rage, and I deflected it from the other people who, honestly, it wasn't their fault. Something needed to happen. Someone had to take that. That was my gift to that community, because anything else would have resulted in violence. And in other cities where that didn't happen, it did. We saw a lot of rioting over the past, not, the past year and a half, but before that. And there was no one there to take this process, to deflect from the anger. Did it feel great to me? No. I wanted to pet puppies and watch cartoons for days. But it helped them heal and get past rage. And that was the way I could give. And really not ask for anything in return. So we're powerful, guys. You can influence the world. I just don't want you to ever forget that.
And I feel that that's something that we can apply in our daily life. We don't necessarily have to put ourselves in front of a mob of 400 people. It is that person who is having a bad day that you let them vent and just get out the fact that this was a really crappy day, and being willing to listen rather than, I have this habit of wanting to fix all the problems that have shown up. So in some ways that generous act is to listen, to hear, to get understanding. Because many times, especially I know whenever I've had that kind of crappy day, it's not necessarily I don't want somebody to fix it. I just want to get it from here out there so it can dissipate and actually go on its merry way. So if you get an opportunity to step into that space, I think that that's one of the greatest acts of generosity you can give to someone, is being that, like for me, I call it sacred listening. It's that act of being the receiver of it without taking it on. And sometimes you may need to pet puppies and watch cartoons afterwards, or find another way to ground, if that's actually, literally grounding or otherwise, but being willing to take on that for them, to help them unburden that. Like, I can't imagine what it would be like to be a priest, to hear confessions all day long. And yet it's a powerful gift that they can give.
And then there's the other generosity where you actually need to hold people accountable. And actually the most generous thing you could do is to remind them of their standards and values, and not lower yours at all, right? Sometimes that's generous. Sometimes we don't. There's this phrase, I don't have the bandwidth. Really? How much generosity is in that?
That's actually a really good question, Tracy.
Yeah.
So how do you manage this being of service and honoring your boundaries and not self-sacrificing?
It's such a good question. And for, I think, most of us in the personal development journey, it's a lifelong learning plan. I mean, it is. And yeah, like I said, I actually needed to pet puppies and watch cartoons for a long time after that. But how do you refuel yourself? And how do you love yourself and maintain those boundaries while giving to others? Michael, what's your key?
So some of the times it really depends on what the boundary is. If it's a matter of time, then you set that time for someone. It's a way to kind of prompt them initially, is awesome. I've got 5 minutes. I'll take it in 5. Go. And give them a clock. And I think it's Mel Robbins who talks about the 5 minutes of feeling bad about yourself. Is you can feel bad about yourself for 5 minutes, but after that, you're done. I'm cutting you off. But there's also this other piece too, especially once again, it depends on this space of generosity too, is reminding myself when someone's doing that this isn't about me, that I'm actually the container, the vessel, and I'm trained in Reiki as well and some other energy, processes. So grounding that is actually part of my practice as well, so that I don't take it on. Doesn't mean I always do, but it is one of those practices that's there that, whenever I'm working with somebody energetically, I feel what they're feeling, and I've got to learn to drop that as well. And it's getting into the practice of, I can take this on and then move on. If it's at the same time as when we're being of service, if you're actually in this giving state, you guys mentioned it earlier, is we give from a cup that's overflowing. We give it from when we are being abundant in ourselves, when we're feeling abundant, when we are doing the self-care already, that we can then give that out to the world. And I think that self-care routine is one of those things. It's that preparation, it's that practice, it's that exercise, so we're able to actually bring it out there. And so when we're not doing those self-care things, it makes us feel, and actually many times be, unable to be generous.
Yeah.
So
I think that's very fair. Also, guys, you'll hear people, I mean, a lot of the kind of morning routine type conversations that people have, cold showers, get up and do this and meditate for this long and then do this and then go to the gym and then, oh, it's only 5 a.m. now. So like all of that stuff, it's really an attempt to find those things that work for you. And you may have to experiment. And I say this not just as the maintenance part, the recovery part too. Like there are things that I can do that, boom, they refuel me faster than anything else. So how do you find those things? Unfortunately, that's the experimentation, because what fuels me super quickly may not recharge Michael in the same way. Like we're all unique like that, but I do have some things that like supercharge me. For me, ocean, being near the ocean does that. Surrounded by intense nature, all green trees, like in a hike, like no paved trail, real hike. That immersive in nature, for sure. Yes, gardening is very therapeutic, meditative, for sure. Music is one of my fuel sources as well. Nutrition, guys. I'll say it to all of you until you also want to cancel me. For sure. Like I am laser focused on nutrition, not just as fuel, but also as drugs. Do you know which food group actually increases, your happiness factor? There are things out there, like you can really tap into this stuff. So, really just listening intensely to what is fueling you and clawing and just guarding your schedule. And you have to be intentional about scheduling it in. The maintenance, the recovery, all of that, like guard it with your life. Guard it with your life. It is your life. It is also your legacy that you risk when you don't do the self-care you need. So you're going to diminish your vibration and impact. So it's super important, guys. Like as much as people say, hygiene is important, this is just as important to me. Like these are up there with hygiene, nutrition, refueling, all of this stuff is all together.
I would also use your boundaries as the guide by which you will, as far as you're willing to go, is knowing what that boundary and actually holding it is going to be really important too.
Yeah.
I'm willing to listen to you, but I'm not going to go murder somebody for you. That's off the table. That's outside my boundaries. I may give them the death stare, but I'm not going to go and get them. But really, being conscious, and sometimes it is potentially, once again, pre-frame it to say, this is what I can give you, so that they actually know what the boundary is, and then having the grace to remind them when they're getting close to the boundaries. No, come on back. But it's one of my least favorite phrases when somebody says, I'm going to give you 110%. I'm going to give you 150%. It's like, no, I want 100%. I want your best in this moment. if you're sacrificing yourself, if you're actually diminishing yourself in order to be here, to show up, please don't. Because I want every person to get to their best level. And that very rarely is by, here, let me give you a finger. That to me is actually giving 105%, because I now no longer have that 5% of that finger. And for me, that violates one of my boundaries, is I want to remain whole by the time we're done. So I think that can help inform some of that, Tracy. I hope that helps.
And good for you, Yvonne, of letting people know your boundaries. I think that's super important. And I think it's like, it's a learning process for many of us. We may not be aware of our boundaries initially. Not all of our boundaries have been tested in every situation. So super important to like be able to say though, like, I'm not comfortable with this, or I think I'm done. That's it. That's all I got.
Tap. I'm tapping out.
Like,
Cutting out. Yes.
I love you. Bye.
Yes.
Yeah.
I need to go take a bath and a bottle of wine, please. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's totally okay. And the more honest you are about that, the more people respect you and will respect your boundaries in the future. Oh, yes, Yvonne, exactly. It's a learning process. It takes a minute. And, you'll also, there are certain people, guys, that you're going to feel really called to help. You're going to feel like this one, I need to go all in on, and use your discernment. Use that discernment, because I do believe that there are people that, we're the one. We're the one. It's us. It's up to us. And that's okay. It's a beautiful responsibility, but it's not everyone. If you think it's everyone, something's wrong. So definitely.
So I kind of, as we're getting ready to wrap up here at the top of the hour, some of the key things we really wanted to bring up was, as Suzanne mentioned, that this generosity starts as an inside job. It's even kind of like what we were just talking about, is that we serve from a place of an overflowing cup. And many times, oddly enough, though, getting to that place of self-care and being of service is something that can fill that cup, but there's so much of this that's a balance. But also, as you saw in the examples that Suzanne and I talked about, is it can be on the small scale, or it can be on a community scale, or on a worldwide scale where you can be generous. And many times we need to take a step back and actually realize when we're not being generous in the various areas of our lives. And kind of that last piece is that I wanted to kind of drive home, is that if you are feeling stuck, find someone to serve. If that's a smile, if that's a handshake, if that's a acknowledgement, if that's a appreciation shared with that person, use it as an opportunity to give, with the intent that it's going to make their life better, not yours.
Beautiful. How are you guys feeling? Where are you at? What's up? And we want to open it up also for questions. Is there an area that you feel challenged in to be generous? Did you feel like you're just done? We get that way. I get that way.
Or as an example you want to share of generosity that you've received or that you've given in the past, let's say the past year. Is there an example of that where you can say, yeah, looking back, that was a time whenever I received grace or generosity from someone else, or were you given it? Agreed, Godson. I would say that there are some who do take your generosity for granted, or consider that generosity as being weakness, which is another one as well. So,
That's the one
but
I get.
but in that context, if somebody's taking it for granted, it's the odd thing about generosity. It's not about how it's received. Just like a compliment, it's not how it's received. It's your intent as you're giving it. And it's that idea of, this is a gift that I'm giving. So what is our limit of generosity? That's actually a good question. I think that's going to be personal for everyone that's there. Is, there are times whenever it's like, I'm tapped, I don't have anything else to give in
Yeah.
this moment.
And Tracy and Yvonne have great words of wisdom on this. Like, if you're keeping score, you're not overflowing, guys. That's not abundance. And if it still feels good to you, yes. If you start to resent it, of course, you're not giving from any abundance. You're in scarcity and you're hurt and there's things going on there. So unpack that. But yeah, Michael's right. Like, it's going to be different from everyone, but it's an inside job, guys. It's your orientation. It's where you're at.
So this kind of comes back to a conversation that I've had on a men's team around the idea of trust. And trust is one of those other things that you give. You can't take trust. It's something that you give to someone else. And his perspective is, I trust everyone to be exactly who they are in the moment and as they're doing it. If that's, I'm not necessarily going to trust you with my money, but I'm going to trust you to be who you are. That your path, your patterns, your decision, your beliefs have actually led you to this. I'm going to trust you to show up as you are. And knowing that I may be able to influence that, or I may not. Am I still going to be generous of me in that situation? I don't think that there's a time, at least that I can think of, where I was generous for someone and it didn't end up paying off for them to a point where they then passed it on to the next person. It may not be immediately. It may be 6 months, a year, 10 years later. But if my intent is to be of service to them, if my intent is to pour from that overflowing cup, I'm not sacrificing for me at that point. I'm not diminishing myself. I am actually coming from that place of abundance, not from scarcity. So is there a limit to my generosity of a smile? No. I laugh and joke and smile all the freaking time. That's one space where I can be generous with people rather than the slump mopey Eeyore style of bringing everybody down. That's one of the spaces that I like to bring that generosity of joking and smiling and actually bringing the energy up in that way. So I don't see it. For me, I don't see a limit for how I can bring that. And that's one of those packets of generosity that I can bring to a situation. So is there a limit on the amount of time that I can spend? Yes. We all have 168 hours in a week. So as Suzanne said, guard that personal care time with your life, because it is your life. If I have the time to give, though, I give the time. It's actually one of the differences that I have in my coaching practice is I don't set the clock for 50 minutes and at 49 minutes say get out. Is I give someone the time to expand on what they're doing. Because I'm not a therapist and I don't base it on the clock. I base my sessions on the impact it's going to have for them. And did they get what they were looking for? Did the results that they actually were seeking, did we get there? Was there that turn of insight that was necessary for us to have that conversation? And sometimes that's 20 minutes and sometimes it's 2.5 hours. So it's going to be individual. But once again, like Yvonne said, it's not about keeping score. It's, did you get something out of the time that we're spending here? What about you, Suzanne? Is there a limit for your generosity? What does that look like for you?
Well, I mean, I'm more interested in hearing where everyone's at and how they're feeling. This is our engagement time, and I think we've talked enough. Guys, this is your session, and this is about me. It's about me. This is about you. So, how are you guys feeling? Is there anything we can help you with when it comes to this stuff? It's not that easy. And like Yvonne the Wise knows, it's a lifelong process. We love seeing you guys here. So how are you going to be generous this weekend? What kind of magic are you going to share? I wish I could be there and see the little magic that you spread, because I know you guys were feeling it today. And I know it's going to trickle elsewhere, which we love. It was great to see you guys today. Michael, what else do you have to share?
On this subject, I think that's about it. I did want to let everybody know that we are actually finishing out this year with some other more powerful conversations as well. So next month, we're talking about from anger to motivation, because anger tends to stop us in our tracks and certainly have us focus on not where we want to go. We also have a couple of other things like confidence and acceptance and feeling empowered and connectedness. So I want to let you know that we do this once a month for a reason, because we feel like we can build up momentum towards something, have this event, and then have that trickle on into the rest of the month. And we like having these conversations with you, and the engagement with this community is off the chart. So thank you very much for actually engaging with us. And I've been on some sessions where it's crickets. So I really appreciate what you are feeding into this. It's the generosity from you. And it helps us actually have this as a conversation with a larger group rather than just Suzanne and I riffing back and forth.
Yeah, then you guys would have to like see us start to sing and dance and all kinds of tricks and try to get you guys awake, and it gets ugly. It's bad. It's really bad. So,
but we'll be doing that coming up here on August 26th. So it'll be up on the calendar soon. And we appreciate you singing and yeah, you don't want to hear me sing, trust me.
All right, loves, have an amazing rest of the weekend. Go do amazing things. Bye.